We are moving into the second panel of our program for today, and I want to invite all of you to enjoy the panel. As you know, the day has been built around the visit of our first innovator in residence, Irving Wladawsky-Berger, who has had a long, distinguished career doing a variety of very innovative things, and Irving is going to chair this panel. I will also invite him in a moment if he wants to give a few introductory remarks to the panel. But let me just describe him very, very briefly. He has spent much of his career working with Big Blue, as it used to be called, IBM. He is currently the chairman emeritus of the IBM Academy of Technology and has been involved in a number of IBM's technical strategy and innovation initiatives, including their open source initiative, which was hugely important both for that organization and for the industry. He was also the person responsible to develop the internet strategy for IBM, which they then relied on very heavily to make a very dramatic comeback and to continue to be a great force in the market. In addition, Irving is active as an advisor to a number of other companies, Citibank and BP among them. He remains involved in education with appointments here in the United States at MIT, as well as overseas internationally. He is not only a PhD in physics, but as importantly, he is a great communicator. For those of you who were at our session yesterday, you realize what a great communicator he is. And if you read the story written by Lou Gerstner in his book about IBM and in other works about IBM, you know that he has been a very, very effective communicator both within his organization, beyond his organization, and also someone who is deeply, deeply committed to institutional innovation so those institutions can continue their technological innovation. So I would like to invite Irving to say a few remarks and serve as chairman of our next panel. Irving, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ernie. And it's been a pleasure to be here all week, and luckily I still have a couple more days. And it's just been a ball. I cannot say it enough. I knew it would be fun, but the nature of the work that goes on here just is extremely exciting. So the first panel set an incredibly good base about what are some of the major advances in social media that are going on. And in our panel, we want to focus explicitly on what are the implications of all these social media innovations in businesses, organizations, and institutions of all sorts. That's what we want to talk about. But given that this is the Annenberg School of Communications and Journalism, and we are in LA, we'll have a particular emphasis on news, media, and entertainment business. So we'll talk about everything, but especially initially, we'll focus on news, media, and entertainment business, and then we'll go back and forth between that and everything else. Now, the first panel did such a good job sort of framing what we mean by social media that I don't need to say much. And therefore, we will take the famous Supreme Court definition that would say, while we don't know what social media exactly is, when you see it, you can recognize it. And so it spans from blogs and wikis and Facebook and MySpace and so on, and virtual worlds, anything that helps people better communicate, better work together, better self-organize as communities. All of that we put in the general category of social media. Now, there is no question that social media is having a gigantic impact on companies and institutions, and it's having an impact across all aspects of them, from their internal organization, their employees, the way they work, the way they innovate, the way they collaborate. But at the same time, since a huge part of social media is the relationship of the institution to its customers, its suppliers, and everybody they do business with, it has also a gigantic impact in the overall external face of the company. Some companies, and I, having been at IBM for so long, I'm so proud that I think IBM is one of them, have jumped right in and embraced it and feel very comfortable being at the sort of cutting edge of social media. We all realize that, in fact, IBM has done a very good job. When we say embrace blogging, we put out a blogging code of etiquette for our employees, but we made it available to everybody. And if you read it, it looks like what your mother would tell you. Seriously, it's not what a corporate thing would say. It's what your mother would say is the way good boys and girls behave. And don't swear, don't be angry at people, be careful what you tell them. There are things you can share with them. There are other things that are better kept private. It's in that nature, but it was good to be explicit with the information, and we did the same thing with virtual worlds and with social media in general, and I think that has helped us a lot, sort of, even though it wasn't that big a deal, the fact that we did it, everybody felt permission to do it. On the other hand, and I've seen this in most companies, many companies are incredibly threatened by social media. They are afraid of what will happen if their employees all of a sudden start having access to all this information. What will they do? What will they say? And I mean, I think it's so naive that if they're going to say something, they're going to say it whether you like it or not. So you may as well embrace it, and then you have a little bit more ability to influence it. But there is a cultural major change that companies have to get through to truly embrace it. And that's what we want to then discuss with our panel. And the format we want to use is, I will start by asking each of our panelists first question, and then we'll have maybe a round of two of additional questions, and then we'll open it up to questions from all of you. And let me start by introducing our panelists. Mark Cooper, next to me here, is the director of the Annenberg Digital News, Annenberg Digital News, and in the Annenberg School. And he's an award-winning journalist and author who has written about and covered rebellions, revolutions, war, politics, and culture from venues ranging from Egypt, Lebanon, South Africa, etc. So you're the real thing that has done that all over the place. Then next to him is Melissa Sefkin, who is an ethnographer and research scientist at the IBM Almaden Research Center. And she is an anthropologist with a PhD from Rice University, and she's been very involved in trying to understand how people use all of these technologies, and with her skills as an anthropologist, her focus has been on the people, not so much on the technologies. Steve Canepa, every quarter he has to deliver the goods. Because
especially this one.
especially this one. But has there been a quarter you don't have to deliver the book? So Steve is the general manager for IBM's global media and entertainment industry. So he's responsible for IBM's media and entertainment industry all over the world. He lives in LA, he manages it out of LA, but he is absolutely all over the world, and I've known Steve and worked with him for many, many years, and he's made just a gigantic amount of progress in working with companies all over the world. Jonathan Taplin is a clinical professor at the Annenberg School of Communication, and his areas of specialization are international communications management and digital media and entertainment. And at the end is David Westfall, who is executive in residence in the Annenberg School of Journalism, and he's the former Washington editor for McClatchy newspapers, and in addition, he supervised McClatchy's Washington and Foreign Business Bureau. So, David, let me start with you. And based on your experience, are the big news and media institutions embracing social media as part of their journalism and business strategies? What do you see out there?
They're starting to, and but it's taken a long while. I think, a lot of our parents and grandparents got on Facebook and Twitter before big media got on, got involved in social media. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I'll mention a couple in a little bit. But yes, they are beginning to. It has something to do with the near-death experience that big media is going through right now, much of it. But fundamentally they're doing it now because there's some money there, and nobody knows exactly how much, and it's sort of micro money at the moment, but there's some money there. Increasingly, people are going to big media news sites through Twitter and Facebook and other social media conventions. And those numbers are growing. Some small media, very small media company, actually have a majority of their traffic coming through social media. That's not at all true for big newspapers, the big networks, and so on. But there's a rapid increase. And how is it happening? It's happening two ways. It's happening institutionally. You see, I think up there. This is my Twitter feed, and it says one of the feeds is the LA Times City Desk. So the LA Times has, I don't know, probably several dozen different Twitter feeds, and so I subscribe to a few of them. And so the LA Times institutionally is getting word out about breaking news, about important news that they link to, as they do here, with a tiny URL or some sort of URL at the end. And the idea is to drive you to their site. So they do it institutionally, and but media is also doing it individually by having individual players, journalists, reporters, producers, editors, tweet sort of company news in a way. In fact, you see Jake Tapper, who's the White House correspondent for ABC, up there in my Twitter feed a couple of times. And Jake is a very active tweeter, and he probably tweets 25, 30 times a day, and most of it is trying to drive traffic to ABC News. So why didn't this happen sooner? It seems obvious that this is probably a good strategy. The truth is the practice of social media seemed at the start to be absolutely contrary to everything that big media was about. It made enforced people to be public people when they were supposed to be not have a persona. Journalists weren't. It tempted journalists to be real people and to say what they thought, contrary to what reporters are supposed to do, which is to be objective and not really say what you think, but just report the facts and be completely neutral. it forced journalists to engage with real people and to listen to them and to respond to them. Initially the reaction of reporters was, I do not have time for that. I already work 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day. There's no way I have time for this. And anyway, the people that that you want me to respond to are idiots, Anyway, so what's the point? And I think, another reason is it put news organizations on the same, big media on the same level as little media, and really on the same level as individuals. You look up there, the LA Times, gets the same treatment on Twitter that Lisa Williams or Greg Mitchell does, other people that I follow. There's no, in social media, there's no, the advantages of big media that they became used to disappear. And so why would you want to do all that? And really they tried for quite a very long time not to. And they wanted to maintain their dominant position, and were hoping that they could and not have to engage. But now, news organizations are moving, and I would say quite rapidly. A good example, I believe it was just last week when Twitter came out with its new lists function, and within, I think, 3 days, the New York Times had a full complement of lists of staff members and experts and so on. They really mobilized fairly quickly, and again, the reason why, as Jeff Jarvis says, in the link economy, all this stuff can be monetized. You can send traffic to the place that you want to.
David, is it fair to look at a lot of these efforts as a kind of research in the marketplace to see what works, what doesn't work, and try to uncover the business model? And I'm saying that because, for example, we all now say, boy, Google is wonderful. But again, as we know, it took Google years to figure out how you make money from search. So is something like that happening now, this kind of research in the marketplace?
Well, news organizations have not been known for research in the marketplace. I think, they as I said earlier, they are in a near-death experience, many of them, as we speak, and so they are rapidly trying to figure things out. There is some experimentation going on, but I would say, generally speaking, it's so far I've been fairly limited in what the news organizations are doing. Some of the, there are exceptions, and certainly the New York Times is an exception.
They are doing more?
I'll just mention one thing. They had a very interesting story a couple of weeks ago about Michelle Obama and her family tree, and some revelations there about her ancestors that hadn't been public before. And online, well, in print too, but online, they had a forum there to ask people to send in information that would help fill in the family tree several generations down that they had not been able to figure out. So they published a work in progress, sort of, and then asked people, and they not only could send in names, but they could send in pictures of ancestors that they might have had. So there are experimentations afoot, but they're awfully late, I would say.
Really. Now, Jonathan, there are big cultural issues here, I can imagine, as we have talked and will continue to discuss. And I know you told me that Disney recently inserted a clause into its writer, producer, and director's contracts forbidding them to comment on the projects they are involved in on Twitter, Facebook, or other social networks without Disney's express written consent. That's correct?
Yeah.
So, what's going on? I mean, what are they afraid of?
The big media corporations have always been resistant to new technologies. One of the things that they're afraid of is that some screenwriter who's pissed off with a director in the middle of a production is going to say, oh, this is a dog movie, and they've spent $200 million on it, and this Twitter feed will end up around the world, and then the word of mouth will get bad, and so they don't want writers who are usually always pissed off because they usually get fired, and some new guy gets hired, right before production, and so they don't want them to badmouth the movie on a social network. So that's the first problem. Second problem is that Hollywood in general resists anything new because they use the word cannibalization mostly, and Steve and I know this very well. I have a few scars on my back with starting the video on demand business and having the studios first embrace me and then stick a thing in my back. But I fortunately the antitrust courts helped me out, so I'm not painful about it. But I think in the last panel, Dimitri raised a big question, which is there are a lot of companies whose ox is going to be gored by this change. And I would suggest, for instance, that perhaps the only rational reason I could think that Comcast wants to buy NBC is that it wants to stop things like Hulu and the announcement that Steve Jobs meant that iTunes is going to put out a subscription. Because both these are ways to go around the cable company and just get yourself a broadband line. I don't need TV. I don't need to pay $120 to Comcast. I'll pay them $35 for broadband, and I can get everything I really want on demand. So my sense is that that's one problem.
But Jonathan, if Hulu is stopped, you'll get Shmulu.
No, it's not to say that somebody isn't going to come up with something else, but by having NBC, one of the three big networks, pull out of a content, then you don't really get all the stuff you want on a service like that. So let me just add the scariest issue, which Henry raised earlier about the Susan Boyle issue. So Fremantle has 200 million views of their content and get zero money from it. That's like, who do I shoot in my corporation for doing this, right? I mean, the chairman of Fremantle must be freaking out, right? But the problem is that the whole monetization issue is really a problem. David mentions that obviously the New York Times, which is doing very well in terms of online, has 20 million viewers online. 1 million people get the newspaper. They still make more advertising money from the newspaper than they do from their 20 million people online. And that is because, from my opinion, Google is trying to repeal the laws of supply and demand. Every single blog, every social network, every site in the world can have as much advertising as they want. So we all learned that value comes from scarcity. And in a world where there's no scarcity, when everyone can be an advertiser, then essentially the value of any individual ad unit is going to decline. And so if you look at the New York Times business plan, they never imagined that they would have 20 million unique users a month. But they never imagined that the individual worth of an ad unit would be so low. And so it's totally screwing with any business plan that they have or any transition into a digital world. They all look at the record companies and say, well, what happened? There was a gigantic reallocation of value from 4 big media companies to Apple, right? Apple stock is $200, and Warner Records stock is $1.20 or something, I mean, so all the value was taken away from the media record companies and reallocated to Apple. they're all afraid that's what's going to happen
No, I understand.
to them. And so that's why they're resisting. And they resist in all sorts of ways. I mean, without guys like Henry to say, hey, Heroes has this fan community that actually kept Heroes on the air, it wouldn't have happened. The network
Jonathan,
didn't give a damn.
Let me tell you, as I hear you talk, and again, let me talk about the industry I know best, which is technology. That happens all the time, that markets change. And I mean, what we have seen all the time is if you try to circle the wagons, you die, because it gets back to the markets will change whether you like it or not. I mean, did we in IBM like the transition from mainframes with unique, expensive technologies to microprocessor-based client servers? No, we didn't like it at all, because we lost our monopolistic position and gross profit margins. But it happened. I mean, who can you sue for having developed microprocessors? And in fact, what would have been even sillier is you would have had to sue yourself, because IBM probably was one of the most advanced companies doing it. So the only answer that we know in the IT industry is you have to innovate like crazy, do research, hang out with the smartest people you know in universities and elsewhere. You're saying that sort of view of keep trying things out has not penetrated media?
Not at all. I mean, when we were trying to get licenses from Paramount, and I won't name the name of the chairman of Paramount at the time, but Steve knows him, I went to see him, and he basically said to me, I just hope I retire before all this stuff happens, you know. And basically he had this huge pile of paper on his thing, and he was writing, and I realized his secretary was printing out his emails. He was handwriting the responses on them and putting them in the outbox for the secretary to write back to people, because he didn't want to learn how to use a computer. So, I mean, that to me was so symbolic of the disconnection. I had heard just the week before that when the people from TiVo had come in to show them the great new device, that he ripped it out of the wall after the demonstration and threw it out the second floor window of the Paramount conference room and said, that's what I think of your damn device, you know, because he saw what was going to happen. You were going to fast forward through commercials. And all that Paramount advertising revenue from Viacom was going to go out the window.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, it's fascinating to hear you say that. No, it's just fascinating. We'll keep talking about it.
Although I think Bob Iger knows how to do emails.
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Bob Iger knows how to do emails.
Yeah,
So we've
Disney's
progressed.
actually, but Disney has Steve Jobs as a very large shareholder.
Yeah. So let me ask.
Cannot avoid
So
the
Steve,
future.
so you are out there, battling it out every day, talking to these people. What are you seeing? And I'm very interested, since you run a global business. Are you seeing differences in embracing these new media technologies in different parts of the world?
Well, first of all, you think about there's a fundamental shift happening in the industry from, analog content distributed through physical networks in a kind of a B2B business model to digital content that gets distributed through digital networks in a B2C model, or increasingly a B2C model, arriving on some intelligent device. So that's a fundamental shift, a major shift for the industry. And, Jonathan mentioned, we've seen the impact of some of those shifts, like the music industry, where between 2002 and 2012, a third of the value of the labels is going to evaporate. Now, you could say it migrated to Apple, but it went right past content into the device, right? So the value chain changed dramatically. So I kind of think about, with all these new broadcast networks and game platforms and the web and mobile devices and intelligent this and intelligent that, there's both user-generated content and professionally produced content, this avalanche of content and this avalanche of new experiences, this new context that you can consume content in. And if you think about the average consumer, they have about the same amount of time they've ever had to consume content, right? So if you do the equation, this avalanche of content and context and experience in the same amount of time, you come up with fragmentation. And so what scares the media companies a lot is it becomes incredibly hard to attract and retain and sustain a core audience around a brand or a network architecture or a platform because you have this fragmentation happening. And it's really challenging the kind of the core foundations of the business models in the media industry in all the different segments. You know, music's just one example. What I thought I'd do today, since we're kind of focusing on social networks, is talk a little bit about, in addition to selling things and helping media companies go through this transformation and kind of deal with the challenges they face and kind of seize the opportunities, we do things like write white papers. So if you go on our website, ibm.com, Media and Entertainment, you can see papers like The End of Television as We Know It, or The End of Advertising as We Know It, okay? Where we kind of take a provocative view about what's happening. But we also do research studies with consumers around the world. So we look at, to your point, we look at emerging markets like China and India, and we look at established markets like Japan or the US or Australia, the UK, Germany, and we try to sense what's happening in usage patterns and consumption and how that time equation is changing. So let me give you some numbers that came out of a study we're just now finishing to give you a sense of some of the dynamics as I see it, kind of related to the points that have already been made. We asked this survey of folks from around the world, and 68% of the respondents said they're on some social media site on a regular basis. 49% use it quite often. And if you look at the younger demographic, as you would expect, 13 to 17-year-olds, 70% of them say they're on a regular basis, and 83% of 18 to 24-year-olds. All right, so the penetration is quite high now already, and of course you see a drop.
This is around the world.
Around the world, and you see a drop off on different, the demographics as you get older. But to me, back to that equation, that means time is shifting in a big way from traditional media to these new social media. So then you think about things like the newspaper industry and what's happening there. Not so much the newspaper per se, the physical one that shows up on your doorstep, but the digital one that the New York Times and others are thinking about. You might have seen Rupert Murdoch say he wants to, he's one of the largest masthead owners around the world, and he wants to move all that to a fee-based structure online. But we asked that demographic in the survey, and the response was that they were twice as likely to go online to a social networking site in a day than go onto a news site, right? So it's not just time shift, it's consumption pattern shift that's happening, because news now travels not through professional media per se, but through these social constructs.
Is it a matter of trust?
Well, so this is one of the debates is journalistic integrity, right? What's the BBC's brand? To the point that was just made here. Does the brand of the LA Times next to that entry make you read that instead of the brand of someone you've never met before? And there's a lot of debate across that spectrum. But look at video too, which is kind of newspaper industry is kind of right in line behind the music industry as far as the failings, the Tribune's in bankruptcy, McClatchy's sold out. I mean, there's, the mastheads in Europe are under incredible pressure.
They are all your customers?
All my customers.
And it's on their backs that you have to make the quarter?
Yeah. So, and I'll come back to how we do that, because in transition, there's a lot of opportunity. Now, there's a lot of resistance, but near death is a very motivating thing, and the newspaper segment's in near death right now, and we've been telling them this since 1996. But I'll quickly tell the story on the newspaper segment. I was in, because you're interested a little bit around the world. In 1997, there was a thing called e-ink that had just been invented by the MIT Research Lab, and it was a piece of mylar that you could address bits to. And so the idea was, it was a format kind of like a little tablet, only it was just a little piece of plastic. And you could print a page of a newspaper on it, and then you'd lift it up and put it down, and page 2 would show up, right? So it had the tactile idea of a newspaper, and but it was digital. And so we took this prototype. I flew to Tokyo, took a plane to Sapporo, took a train out to Hokkaido Shimbun and had a Saturday meeting with the board of directors in 1997. And we showed them this, and we talked about digital workflow, and we talked about the ability to reach an audience and connect with them and consume with them and provide a different version of the paper to different audience groups and all the things that, you know, are kind of common thoughts nowadays. And we finished this great half day in the boardroom with them, and they were very attentive and listened very carefully to us. I was with my publishing leader at the time. And so they proudly said, well, now let us take you on a tour of our newsroom. And we walked downstairs, and there was the newsroom and the layout boards. And they were all sitting there, and they were cutting stories with razor blades. And we thought to ourselves, we might have overstepped just a little. But anyway, so back to video. So you know, today's debate is, if you read the papers, is really the Hulu debate, which has already been mentioned once here. And so video's the thing, and 76% of the consumers we survey said they now watch video on their PC. That's up 27% in our survey from last year. So we're trying to baseline some of these things so we get a sense of the rate of change. And 32% now have watched video on a mobile device or a mobile phone, and that's up 45% from last year. So I think of those as pretty dramatic swings in consumption patterns. So that drives me to think, well, what's that mean to traditional media? I mean, back to this, bad word, the cannibalization. And so we asked the question, and 50% of the 18 to 21-year-olds said they're watching less television now because they can watch it online, right, in some fashion. So let me just ask real quickly, if you think about your own television viewing habits, because this is a reasonably young demographic, this year compared to last year, do you watch less television now than you did last year because you can see Hulu and other things online? Okay, so there's your 50%, right? So that dynamic's happening, and that leads me to think about, okay, so what's that mean to the business of media and entertainment? What's that mean to broadcast, right? And the reality is most social sites that have video on them operate in the range of about 10% to 40% of the value that same content would earn in a traditional television broadcast model. All right? So time shifts, usage patterns shift, but value doesn't. And so that's the challenge that media companies are facing, because they have to try to figure out how they're going to sustain value. And for me, it really comes down, Zucker made the comment a while back about moving from NBC chairman, moving from dollar content to dime content, right? And to me, it's kind of like what happened in the automotive industry. Irving and I were talking about this last night a little bit, or the finance industry, which is those industries realized that they needed to automate workflow and processes. And they allocated a whole bunch of back office infrastructure across as many transactions as they possibly can. It drove merger and acquisitions in the industry and consolidation and a whole bunch of changes, structural changes. But the net was they had to drive down the unit cost of producing a piece of a transaction, a piece of value. And so the media industry has to do the same. It has to realize how it can operate in a world where the fundamentals of the business model requires them to be much more efficient.
What you're saying, again, as I'm hearing you and trying to sort of abstract it a little bit, it sounds like sort of Schumpeter 101. And, Joseph Schumpeter is this famous Viennese economist that in 1950, I think it was in the 1950s, talked about creative destruction.
Right.
That what happens in free markets is that innovation drives creative destruction. And what that means is that the innovation takes out the inefficient companies, and then by them coming out, it opens up sunlight for the new players that will build the new future. And that's how you get progress.
But Irving, the problem is that there is no Moore's law for media talent. In other words, you're always able to produce a microprocessor cheaper next year than last year.
No, I understand.
But a certain number of people used to make a TV sitcom I mean, reduce that cost by half in
No,
1 year is almost
I understand,
impossible.
but Jonathan, and I want to now ask Melissa a question, so let me put something
Sure.
out and when we'll discuss it. There are times when your basic technology is so commoditized that you need to move on up the stack or something else. Again, I'll keep coming back to the IT industry because I know it, so it's a little bit easier to talk about things you know about. Hardware is a commodity now. So you see IBM and other companies moving to software and services more. When you don't do that, then you get incredibly good companies like Sun Microsystems get wiped out. And you know, Oracle has acquired them, and I think they're waiting for EC approval. And the answer is, if something commoditizes, you have to find, is there some surrounding new model where you can make money? That's innovation. So let's hold that thought, because Melissa, we've been talking so far about the use of social media in business, in selling to customers, etc. But another huge part of social media is in transforming organizations, is within the organization. And I'm sure that as an anthropologist, you must study that a lot. What goes on within an organization as they embrace or don't embrace social media. So would you like to tell us about it?
Yeah, and I'll pick up actually on that notion of sort of creative destruction. And I think what you're pointing to is that sense of, and it can be argued, that there are certain things that are underway and happening whether you ask them to or not, whether you like them to or not. And one thing that I know from years and years of studying the very mundane practices of work and people in organizations and how everyday work transpires and what goes on in it, is that even in the most might be considered sort of routine and everyday, that people are tremendously resourceful in finding innovative ways to vary the process, to improve processes, to make it more interesting, to connect, to do all sorts of things. So I think that one of the fallacies which you began with, Irving, which is for organizations to imagine that if they don't allow it, people won't be doing it. In fact, they will be doing it. And we see that with social media. That, you know, there's all sorts of a push from the ground up to be involved, to continue to connect. Now, where I would maybe differ from some people in the room is to say that what we see with social media is really fundamentally new. I actually think it's a tremendous continuity with what we know about society and how connections happen. People have always found, and workers in the organizations and workplaces have always found ways of connecting up and finding each other. Finding people who share knowledge, or who share practice, or who share grumblings and complaints about the organization. We have a labor movement. There's all sorts of things that emerge because that's what people do anyway. So I am of the opinion that organizations would be foolish to try to outright sort of forbid or avoid the use of social media.
Have you studied what percentage of organizations do that or not? Do you have any feelings for that?
Truthfully, I haven't studied percentages. I'm a qualitative researcher rather than quantitative. Not that I don't pay attention to the quantitative, but it's not something that I go out and generate myself. So I don't know more broadly, but what I can say some things about, maybe to give a little bit of insight to what happens inside of IBM, which certainly you know, and Julia and Steve. But just to think about this, I think it's pretty remarkable. If you think of what goes on at IBM, we have wikis, we have blogs, we have people would be on Twitter, Facebook, any of these. There's internal versions of all those. There's an internal version of Facebook. There's a sort of corporate version of Twitter. We have virtual worlds. We're in Second Life, and I'll talk some more about that. That's something I've been involved in quite a lot. We now have an internal version of Second Life. We, of course, have email. We have instant messaging. We have all these things. All of these things are going on inside the organization. So we've sort of produced our own replications or versions, sometimes ahead of the commercial industry, sometimes following it. for those sorts of things to be going on. So that's IBM, and I suspect that that's not the case everywhere, but I also would guess that it's not completely novel and unique. I'm sure there's organizations that have some semblance of a lot of that. So a lot of it is really going on, and again, I think it is a continuity of how sort of communities form, how people find each other in informal practices and communication and learning. It's a tremendous resource for that kind of learning practice, and as you pointed out, IBM really does embrace that, getting people to experiment, getting people to learn and to share. You know, that is, if you think about it, that is the quintessential corporate challenge, which is corporations could be more effective. Businesses or organizations of any kind could be more effective if you can get effective knowledge sharing going on. So why wouldn't you want to encourage that kind of knowledge sharing to go on? Well, actually, I think there are some ways, and there are some challenges for how organizations are using social media. My experience at IBM and keeping abreast a little bit, again, I don't have numbers, but knowing something of what goes on at places like Yahoo or Microsoft or others. So there are, of course, some risks that come with, internal use of social media. One is and I won't go into this at length, but there are the same kind of liability questions about you don't want IBMers out there sort of grumbling about the new project that they're on. You don't want them sharing IP. You don't want them sort of in advance of the market creating a potentially bad reputation for something that's about to launch. We don't have the problem inside of organizations of the monetization and how do we capitalize on this. We don't, at least in a monetary way, but we do have similar concerns for effectiveness and where our time is spent. So you want employees to be productive, and IBM and other corporations are having to constantly weigh and ask, is all this time spent in these different with these tools and in these different environments a productive use of employees' times and ways of interacting, or is it not? And it also, I think, will begin to raise, I don't think we've seen too much of this yet, but I think in academia you've seen more of it, which is how do you count the participation of people in social media towards their performance appraisals? So, just like, Henry, you were talking earlier about, your 2,000 readers for a blog compared to the 500 subscribers or something, I might have the numbers wrong. I know that people are using that for tenure arguments about impact and all those kinds of things. I think we'll start to see that inside of organizations as well, to say on the teamwork front or on my impact front, the fact that I participate actively in these kinds of blogs and stuff should mean that I will be,
but look, it's an interesting question. If you are in a research lab, let's say doing physics, and if somebody asks the question, is the fact that you read physics journals and go to physics conferences a waste of time or not, the answer is you can be a good physicist and not hang out with other physicists. I think, am I correct? That's accepted in the classic disciplines. And at some level, for professionals, more and more in these new emerging disciplines, and that's what we're talking about, knowing what's out there and how people use it feels to me like the equivalent of reading physics journals.
But
is that?
But a lot of the people in corporations aren't those people. I mean, I do work. I've done work. I've gone to the Philippines and hung out with people who are in service centers who are operating billing or maybe answering phone calls. Should they take time off of answering phone calls?
Well, I don't know.
I mean, I would argue yes, but that's a political moral position more than it is a effective.
But if I'm talking to somebody buying, I don't know, a ticket to Broadway, and in the middle of buying the ticket, they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, my phone rang. I'll get back to you." That feels like bad customer service. So I don't think they will do that. But I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer. But what I find so fascinating with these discussions is that we are learning how to deal with systems where the components are people. And if you say, well, people are just like this glass of water, or this bottle of water, or the wing of an airplane, the answer is no. this one, once I put it here, it will stay put here. You know, it may fall, but maybe. But people move all over the place, and their minds move all over the place. And so all of a sudden, we're trying to learn how to deal with that. And again, this is an emerging discipline, so we don't know how to do that. And it's possible that a customer service rep who, in addition to doing their job as customer service, has access, is allowed. Maybe the answer may be, if you treat the customer service rep as a mechanical customer service rep, they will never be as good as if you treat them as professionals. And if you have professional customer service reps, part of it is they'll do other things. I'm just speculating aloud. Maybe we're learning how to look at these disciplines in a different way. I don't know where that kind of, I don't know if you do that kind of research here or where people do that kind of research, but maybe that's part of what's going on, that we are being pushed to do research in brand new areas that we never...
Well, and I think that we, again, my experience from IBM is that it is trying to explore and experiment with the opportunity of using these four, again, expanding the kind of learning or development opportunities that people might have. So, for instance, I've been involved with a number of efforts, something near and dear to your heart, with using Second Life for kind of training and community building kind of efforts at IBM. So building these kinds of environments for exactly like a customer service rep to sort of simulate and play out and experiment how they might behave and what kinds of things might go on. And they're great environments for that because you can precisely enter in elements that that they might experience in real life that would be harder in some instructional kind of form to offer. And there's also that wonderful, as somebody, I attend meetings every week in Second Life. Frankly, not very effectively, I'll be really honest. But we're trying, and there's interesting things going on. But there's nothing like the great equalizer of, entering this virtual domain and being able to say to some senior manager, oh, your hair just came off, or where did you get that new skin? I'd like it too, let me give it to you. Or helping them navigate when they're sitting on top of a table and didn't mean to be. So there are these kind of new relationships and things that can form, and I think there's some particularistic kinds of uses like that, which is yet different from saying, spend part of your day job, like I get to as a researcher. I'm in a privileged position as a researcher at IBM, which is quite unlike what a lot of other people would be.
Now, one of the funs of being here is that the faculty here is so accomplished. Like, if you read that, Jonathan's bio, you find out he was the producer of The Last Waltz. Right? And I don't know how many of you have seen The Last Waltz? It's considered, is it the best rock movie ever, Jonathan?
I think so.
It is way up there. It is, recently there was, Scorsese did the Stones concert.
Yeah.
And that would you agree that was also pretty good?
It's okay.
And then Mark Cooper, he ran the Huffington Post Off the Boss project, which was the largest citizen journalism social media reporting network covering the 2008 presidential campaign. So that's a superb example of social media in sort of the political arena and other things. So what did you learn from that, and where do you see social media in this grander societal area?
Well, as they say at Exxon Corporation, thank you for asking me that question because I'm going to answer a different question. First, why did IBM sell its laptops to Lenovo is what I really want to know.
Because it became a commodity.
Because the ThinkPads were much better when IBM made them. So was the customer service.
It became a commodity.
One word.
Actually, I'm going to give you a back.
Actually,
a
you
background.
can answer whatever you want.
And say something. And
I think he's
also
going to.
and also related to something that a couple of panelists said. As I'm sure you know, Schumpeter's notion of creative destruction, actually, he was not the original author of that. He was blogging that. That was much better explained by Marx a century previous in Capital, and where he precisely talked about the creative destruction of the markets, and in a positive way. I just used that to get me to the second waypoint, which is that Marx also came up with the notion that the old society was pregnant with the new, which brings us to the difference. It brings us to the tension between the old and new media, because I would just re-emphasize what both David and Jonathan said. I'm a journalist, so I don't know anything about business, but I know something about the journalism business, and I would say that even at this late date, the journalism business, which is different than media broadly defined, but the journalism business, maybe I'm overstating it, but I don't think they really, I will overstate it. I don't think they have a clue as to what to do with social media. They know it's at the gates. They know they are pregnant with it. Their real instinct is to abort. But unfortunately, they're in the 10th month of pregnancy, and to continue with bad metaphors, the old media, the most resistant and most denial-ridden sectors of the old media today, continue right up to this afternoon insist rather haughtily that there can be no new media without the old media. But then we'll go back to the metaphor of pregnancy and say that's like parents who believe that their child with whom they're pregnant and who eventually will be born will absolutely be dependent upon them for the rest of their life. And they are economically for too long a time, but they actually have individual personalities and get along just fine after the parents pass away. So I don't know exactly how that translates into media terms, but I know it's true.
Try a metaphor.
I'm trying. Well, we'll go back to the metaphors. So going back to the Marx or Schumpeter, if you will, I think it's rather obvious that the old system has already been overthrown, and as in any revolution, it takes some time for the new system to consolidate.
So are you saying that these are zombie media companies?
Yeah, in fact, I was thinking that in fact that phrase is running through my mind, that people were talking about near death. I would say some are in their afterlife, and they are zombies. And as we know, in certain situations, zombies can walk around for a while, right?
They're very popular.
They're very popular. They make movies about them and everything. But I think that the old system has already been destroyed. A new system could take a long time to build and consolidate. There could be many new systems, not just one. Whenever I'm going to continue with the metaphors, whenever there's a revolutionary situation like that, whether it's in politics or technology or society, the new always carries with it influences from the old. There's a tension between the old and the new. There's still strains of the old and the new. Yeah. So I'll throw out another metaphor and say, you had the Girondists and the Jacobins in a post-revolutionary situation in France, and you could argue that the Girondists were closer to the Ancien regime than the Jacobins, but they were nevertheless something new. And then I want to just say, in that respect, I want to refer to something I'm really glad you brought up, because it was a revelation to me on Sunday. Well, not because I was in church, but my child, my daughter, is writing a book on Mad Men, the series, and I was watching the last episode with her.
I'm sorry, your daughter, and she's in college?
She's finishing. She's 25.
25. So
yeah.
She's in graduate school?
No. She's out of school.
I see. So she's writing a book.
She's writing a book
Oh, okay.
about Mad Men,
Not the term here.
about
Okay.
Mad Men and what it tells you about the 1960s, what it reveals about America in that time. And
Well, it means that if I were a girl, I would be much happier living now.
well, I don't know.
correct?
She has an ambivalent view of that, but
Really, girl, if
She
there
kinda
are
likes-
ways in which being a girl in the Mad Men.
she kind of likes Don Draper. But
But you can be a 2009 girl can like Dan Draper.
as long as you don't have to be married to her.
No, but she can still have her career.
Correct,
and
absolutely, no
and
question.
date
But
him or
but she
whatever.
found something really interesting because I don't want to spoil it for, well, it's not a spoiler. If you haven't seen last week's episode of
I haven't
Mad Men.
seen it.
Okay. Well,
No, you have to talk about it.
No,
This is
but-
very important.
but
It won't
no,
ruin
but
it
this
for
is
him.
a serious. This is
conversation seems to have degenerated.
no. I'm trying to make this a serious point. It's a serious point, which is that
Peabody, so
it's a serious point, which is that it's a very serious point, which is she footnotes these things. So she immediately did some research the same night of the episode last Sunday night, and then she blogged about it and found, to reinforce your point, that in a poll, I should have brought it. I didn't think of bringing the data, but it's online. In a poll that was conducted a week after the assassination of JFK, it was found that an overwhelming majority of people had heard about the assassination of JFK within 1 hour of it. And here's the takeaway. The overwhelming majority of those people heard about it from a friend or from somebody else, and then turned to the media to get more information, which is a very long roundabout way of saying that the social network exists. The social networks pre-existed
of course.
IBM and Twitter. And of course, we've amplified them and electrified them. And I think that in many ways, to actually now answer the question, I think that in many ways, the lateral or horizontal nature of the social network is a much more natural form of social communication than the vertical form that we've seen with at least the modern media, and therefore is not going to go anywhere. And the old media, the pregnant mother, whatever metaphor we're using, the ancien regime, they really don't know what to do with it because there is perhaps no particular industry there is no other industry that is so directly threatened by social media than traditional journalism.
I understand. But, I want to turn to the audience, but I want, as you were talking, this thought came to mind, and I just want to put it out there and then we'll see. And, as Henry knows well, since he just came from MIT 2 years ago,
Just this September.
So
just this September,
3 months ago.
in the engineering world, one of the main jobs of universities is to be looking at where things are heading, and invariably they are looking at new whatever field you're talking about. So there is the established order, and most universities don't do any research in the established order. There's nothing to do. But they are at the vanguard of where this all needs to be heading. And what's so interesting is, for example, when IBM need to totally transform its architectures, etc., a lot of the new ideas of parallel architectures and things like that, universities had been working on for a while. And that's a role we all look at engineering universities. And would you say MIT takes that infinitely seriously? And so as you were talking that here are these companies that are not in good shape, they're zombie companies, new media.
Some of them.
It's an interesting question. Are the media and communication schools like Annenberg the places that are setting the path for the future where the old media companies that want to survive need to go and where the new media companies need to go? is there an equivalent role for the universities in looking at the future, and are they doing it?
I would say that's our aspiration. But I also think that we are in what, to quote another Marxist philosopher, Gramsci said, we're in an interregnum.
Right.
He said the old is dying and the new cannot be born, and in that interregnum, many morbid symptoms will emerge.
That's right.
And we're experiencing these incredibly morbid symptoms, and part of it is near-death experiences for newspapers, but it's also for the movie companies. The DVD was the total way
No,
that
no, I
they
understand,
existed.
but one of the winners in all this could be the universities,
I
that is
agree.
the departments that are the path setters for the future in the same way top engineering departments do that for the world of engineering. That's the feeling.
Well, that is what Jonathan said, though, is true. That is, of course, you're correct, and that is our stated aspiration. And it has been pounded home to us by a couple individuals sitting over there. So one can say with complete frankness that, one can evaluate how well we meet that goal or how possible it is to meet that goal. And there are tensions even within the school, of course, because, there's the old and the new coexist in the same school. But the school, I think, it's fair to say that this school and other schools that we are aware of, journalism schools that we have contact with, are very much immersed in that and very much committed to that. Doesn't mean that we're going to come up with any answers. What I will say is, without sugarcoating it, is that I do think that, at least for those of us of a certain age and a certain experience, it's a privilege to be surrounded by so many young people who have a completely different perspective on this than the one we grew up with, and it's reassuring, and it offsets a lot of the doom and the gloom that one hears from their other set of
But
from their peers.
that may be why universities are so great. I mean, the faculty is wonderful, whatever.
Oh, wonderful.
But it's all in the students and the energy that they bring. So speaking of that, let me now turn to your questions and comments about any of the things we've talked about or should have talked about. And thank you for not giving away the Mad Men plot. I have a feeling Kennedy got killed.
He got killed.
I keep waiting for the sort of feminist revolution.
It's coming. It's coming.
No, there's
Season 4.
There is no question. I mean, they've been building up to that. So, please.
So this question is in regards.
Can you speak? Yes, speak a little.
This question is in regards to Professor Chapman's earlier comment about traditional media and fixed costs. I think that there's kind of a blockage in traditional media when they consider all the ways that they could lower the average cost of a film. In 2005, the average cost is something like $62 million, but it really doesn't have to be that way. So I'm wondering why they haven't more considered things like the fact that Bollywood reaches a larger audience but has a fraction of the marketing budget, or the fact that companies in the sciences use crowdsourcing all the time for things that used to be core competencies.
I actually think that this is one of the roles we could play in Irving's challenge to us. And we had a little discussion about this yesterday, in the sense that over at the cinema school, they just basically train people so that they can go to work in Hollywood. And some of the things that Henry has challenged me through, because I have some students that also work with him, he shows me kids remaking Star Wars. Okay, for nothing, right? Completely remaking the whole movie in pieces
On a map.
for nothing, right? And so
You mean like mashups? And
it's the ultimate
iPhone app.
mashup. It's the ultimate mashup. And so the point is, Steve's notion that everybody's going to have to get real about costs is very serious. And one of the ways we ought to think about that is, how do we use these digital tools to drive down costs, and how do we get kind of participatory co-op labor, when I think that that Linux, to which you guys now are able to surf off of, was created by 80,000 man-years of free labor, I think, well, how did that happen? You know, that just defies all of Adam Smith's notions. But something is happening in this world of cooperative, it's like ProPublica, it's happening in the news business, it's happening all sorts of places. It's very hard to get somebody to be a stringer in Afghanistan for nothing, though. That's the hard part.
Let me use something as an example.
Yeah, let me just say something about Adam Smith, because I studied him a lot recently. He wrote 2 books. The Wealth of Nations, which is the one that's best known, which is all about the invisible hand and you know, the sort of selfish capitalism. But he wrote another book that he thought was even better, The Theory of Moral Sentiments.
He wrote that one first, though.
He wrote that one first, and there it was the value of communities, essentially.
Right.
He felt that human beings were social animals, community animals, and they wanted to do good things for each other. And sometimes when people think of capitalism, they forget that second part of collaborating and doing things together. So that's why I think Adam Smith would be proud of open source. And since he's dead, I can say that.
Right, exactly.
I think he would think, boy, this is the theory of moral sentiments. And Yochai Benkler has written, you know,
The Wealth of Networks.
the Wealth of Networks and all kinds of things like that. And he views it as a means of production that's self-organizing, that arises because we are humans, and humans are social animals and like to self-organize. No, but this is very important because at the end, that may be what social networks are doing, is tapping into these primal things in humans. That's why if you're a media company and you say you don't like that, it's like saying, okay, and I don't like sex either, and I don't like kids drinking beer either. The answer is I'm sorry.
I mean, I'm trying to get my students to think about using open source methods to do documentary production.
No, I understand.
You know,
And interestingly, open source has been around since 1998. I mean, it's a relatively recent, phenomenon.
But because
and
the
just-
internet, before the internet, it was difficult to do that kind of collaboration. So the technology made it possible to take it to a huge level.
So let me give an example
Yeah,
to
please.
tie this back to your question. So IBM embraced Linux, back in the late 90s, and
2000.
yeah, the gentleman who called me up and said, okay, we're going to announce to the world that we're putting a $2 billion commitment behind Linux, but we have nothing to say about it. Interesting. So I said, well, let's look at the animation and effects business.
Right.
Okay, so because this was based completely on a proprietary architecture, and it meant that you had big equipment and you had big buildings and people all met in big buildings, and that's where all the work got done. And what Linux did is it was kind of a great democratization of the animation and effects industry, because now someone in Beijing or someone in London or someone in Brazil could get a little workstation running Linux, and if we got all those applications ported onto Linux, the work could go wherever it went.
Steve, it killed SGI, didn't it?
Exactly.
I don't know how many of you have heard of SGI. It just killed it.
Right. So we took SGI from a 95% market share. I walked into Pixar and said, wouldn't this be good? And it took 90 days to go from all SGI to this whole open architecture.
Wow.
And then it took the entire industry about 15 more months.
Right.
And SGI went from 95% market share to 0.
Yeah.
So my point
Creative
is...
destruction.
Yeah, talk about creative destruction. But my point is that if you think about filmmaking, what are the two most profitable films, or two of the most profitable films this summer? Well, Hangover which was done on a relatively low budget for Warner Brothers, and the phenomenal movie that Paramount is now making a mint on, right? I forget the exact title.
Paranormal Activity.
There you go, Paranormal Activity, right?
$12.
Made for $15,000
Right.
or something thereabouts.
15,000.
All right, now in the, I think, $80 million range in box office or something. But my point is, as these tools become available, you don't have to be attached to a big studio and to make a really compelling piece of art. And I think that's one of the things that comes out of some of the new tools and technology and open standards and things like that can accelerate the change. To exactly your point.
Please.
I'm interested in the relationship, and I would say the subservient relationship of money to power, and that potentially, is it that the old media is resistant to new media not because of the economic control, but maybe because of power control? I'm thinking of things like, basic things like putting our leaders on trial for breaking very basic rule of law issues around torture would be a great financial boon to the old media. I mean, the newspaper, everyone would be reading it to see what Cheney's saying,
He would.
But there's not been much advocacy for that type of thing. And I'm also thinking of, like, I currently have beef with people like Mark Cooper and other denizens of the New Left who are encrusted in both old and new media around things like 9/11. I mean, scientists put out the, pictures of this advanced explosive still unexploded in the dust. And in Denmark, where one of the scientists is from, they put it on mainstream media. They didn't advocate it as the truth, but we can't even get it in The Nation or Huffington Post. So what is the relationship of, potentially subservient relationship of economics to power?
I guess I'll speak on behalf of the corporate media. Which is, if only that was the problem, we'd be fine. I understand apart from differences we might have on the origins of September 11th, I understand your question. I think it's a good question. I don't think it's an ideological problem when it comes to the old media. It is economic. It's an issue. It's a sociological economic issue, and it's basically one of fear, not of what's going to be said by the new media, because that's already being said. It's a fear that they lose that they are losing, in fact, what has been a monopoly or a professional monopoly. In fact, they even lose the definition of what makes them a professional. I would say, without making light of it, I don't know if I believed that September 11th was not conducted by Al-Qaeda, which is not what I believe. But if I did believe that, and I believe that either the Bush administration did it or tolerated it or whatever it is, I would actually be quite happy, because that has gotten a tremendous amount of resonance in new media without the New York Times or even The Nation or the Huffington Post paying any attention to that point of view. There's actually, unfortunately from my point of view, millions of people who believe that. But they didn't need anybody. They didn't need anybody from The Nation with a circulation of 150,000 to the New York Times with 40 million readers online to get that information. They will get it in any case. And actually, to be frank with you, I'm one of those people who think it's good. I'm not worried about filters or about authenticity of information. I'm worried that one verifies that. But I don't think that we need somebody to verify it for us. Whenever anybody brings that up and says, well, how am I supposed to know what to trust on the internet? Or, well, how do I know this is real or not? The example I like to use is, well, you can walk across the street over here to the Doheny Library, and I don't know, how many books are in the Doheny Library? A couple 100,000? Mm-hmm. And there's a couple 100,000 books there. And you know what? There's nobody there telling you which book is real and which book isn't, because sitting right next to, the rise and fall of the Third Reich, is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in a really beautiful leather-bound, gold-embossed book, and you can pick it up off the shelf and it feels real good and say, well, this looks authentic. And no librarian comes over to tell you, you know, that's not been verified. So I think it's a more difficult task that we have now as consumers of information, but it should have always been that way. We should always be skeptical and never have believed anything
But
because
isn't
it
that
was
part of being in a democratic society?
Oh well, it is part of being in a democratic society, and the poor subjects who sit in this classroom in that we teach in our homeroom. There's one or two of them back there. They know that the first week or two, one of the ways that I like to frame this is not from them. I mean, I know that's not what this panel is about. Is not to frame it from the point of view of how institutions and corporations are going to adapt to this. I like to frame it the other way, which is the way people adapt to this. And I think that it's an incredible revolution that we're living through, because it's the first time in human history that the right to publish it has a tangible reality. It's no longer just an abstract right. Your freedom of expression, your freedom of publication is real, it's immediate, and it's cheap.
Yeah. We used to say, you can freedom of speech as long as you have enough money to pay for a printing press.
Blogger.com.
But Irving, I just want to ask you one question, because it seems to me that to this question and all of it, one of the things we suffer from is what Galbraith used to call the conventional wisdom. Somehow, yesterday you talked about coming to IBM and overturning the conventional wisdom. Well, we make proprietary software systems, we run on mainframes. The New York Times published Judy Miller because it was the conventional wisdom. There was just the general sense, well, of course the Pentagon wouldn't tell a lie, or of course Dick Cheney wouldn't feed her any nonsense. Well, how do you get big institutions to stop accepting the conventional wisdom?
Well, I again, based on our experience in IBM, where we almost died, and based on observing how many other companies did die, SGI, I mean, they may be still alive a little bit.
Sun is dead.
Digital, Sun is dead. I think you have to be petrified of dying. If you are a company and you're not afraid that you will be toast, you won't change. I mean, changing is very painful. That's why the people who ran IBM before didn't do it. They were nice people. You have to. It's a massive restructure. The banks, this is important. It's not a moral question. It's a very human question. The banks don't want to change. And we're seeing this struggle playing out that I don't think our financial institutions can continue the way they have been, but boy, are they fighting it. Look at healthcare, and finally, the AMA is supporting the healthcare plan, but look at how long they've gone. And at some point, there are a couple of things you have to be convinced. One is that the change is inevitable, and it's going to happen whether you like it or not. That's a critical thing.
That's right.
By the way, the universities, research communities have a huge role in that, because you guys can all decide where you see the world is going, and that, you say it enough, creates inevitability. And then you have to have the 10-month-old, which I'm assuming are the new babies, the venture companies start doing it. So you realize If you don't do it, they are already doing it. They don't give a shit.
That's right.
Right.
They
That's
are
correct.
doing it.
That's right.
And in fact, how are they doing it? They're hiring your students.
That's right.
Now, can the company say, well, I'm going to stop Henry from educating the students in horrible thought? I can't imagine anybody trying to do that. No, seriously. There may be countries where you can do that, but I don't think you could do that. So there is this inevitability, and sometimes a number of companies have to die. So the fact that this gets back to creative destruction and so on. The marketplace doesn't care that individual companies make it. It only cares that the industry goes forward, but the fact that the industry goes forward with totally different players, it's totally fine.
Well, yeah, and in our industry, I think it also means that not only are certain companies going to die, certain individuals are going to die professionally, right? And that goes back to what you were saying about, I forgot who was saying, it was you, who was talking about lowering the cost of production. It's a touchy subject, especially for those of us who, are in our 50s or 60s and have mortgages and children and all that and have a long career in journalism.
But that's why it's painful.
Right, it's very painful. But the fact is, the truth of the matter is, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm just old enough and just young enough to have bridged this whole thing. A lot of journalists, to come back to journalists, are not going to make the kind of money that they made before, but there are going to be more people doing journalism, and that money's going. And just to push back a little bit, or to agree with my colleague Jonathan, I'm not going to fight with IBM, there is a question of how much you're going to pay the stringer in Afghanistan, right? But whether we like it or not, right? It's just the law of the marketplace. We now see that because of technology, et cetera, you don't really have to pay your stringer in. Well, actually, you don't have to send somebody from here to be your stringer in Afghanistan, because now you have a network of bloggers and people who can actually write and think and produce journalism,
and probably shoot video,
right? Who are in Afghanistan and might even, God forbid, they might even actually know the situation better than the guy who was sent out from 48th Street, right?
And I think it's...
Let me ask you, because I know we're coming to that.
Yeah.
For those of us who are in institutions which, inshallah, and crossing my leg, aren't about to die tomorrow,
Right.
can the panel think of some examples of institutions which not only survived but thrived and led because they recognized opportunities, they had the resources and leadership, they had a client base who were pushing them to do this, in our case students. But I wonder if the panelists could point to relatively large institutions which have made the transition and weren't driven by the fear of immediate decapitation.
Back to the French Revolution.
A little tongue-in-cheek, the Catholic Church. I mean, this isn't all that different from the change from orality to literacy and the rise of publishing and press and all that. So just, again, looking historically, there's other kinds of ways where there's been threats that have shifted things, but then adapting.
When the Catholic Church is changing, you're saying?
No, it did, way back,
After
yeah. I'm
Gutenberg.
talking, yes.
Well, what about, I mean, there's sort of some which
Organized religion.
And for all I know, there may be married priests and female priests, and maybe
No, absolutely.
the Anglican
Absolutely, it's
movement
coming.
is getting ready.
Microsoft is not about to die immediately. Now, some would say it's got, like Sun, it's got a declining, the future is very short. But are there corporate examples of a switch? FedEx, you talked about FedEx yesterday.
Yeah. Well, let me give one example that I find really compelling. but a number of companies, a number of classic manufacturing companies.
Right.
Let me pick one in particular, Rolls-Royce engines, not the cars, but the jet engines in the UK. Classic manufacturing, jet engines. They embrace a whole new model where their business model is uptime for the airplanes. And so when you buy their engine, you're buying their service. And they have instrumented the engines so that it's constantly transmitting information to their expert centers in the UK, and it's being analyzed and seen, is it okay? And The Economist had a fascinating article several months ago about a plane flying across the Pacific, and they noticed something not quite right with the engine. So the first question the pilots asked was, do I need to land quickly in Hawaii or something? In real time, they got the answer from the experts in the UK, you're okay. We know what it is, it's not fatal, etc. Next question, when we land in LA, do we need to take the plane out, which is horribly expensive, or can we continue until the next maintenance? All the analysis said it's okay. That was a total different business model, and we're seeing more and more companies shift to services on top of the technology. And that's happening more and more. Steve, I don't know if you see
Ernie,
that.
I would just suggest one media company that reinvented itself, and it was Disney.
Right.
When I was a producer at Disney in 1983, it still could kind of limp along. It still made some movies every year, but it was a dead company. I mean, the president of the company used to play poker for 3 hours every afternoon outside the executive dining room. And, and then it reinvented itself. And it was helpful that the DVD and the VHS just happened to arrive at
Jonathan,
exactly...
did Michael Eisner do the reinvention?
Yeah, Michael Eisner and Frank Wells, they completely reinvented it.
I think it's worth noting, too, that we've been talking about media today and IBM, but it's worth noting that it's very unlikely that the Internet is going to stop with media in terms of creative destruction.
That's
that
right.
there are a lot of other industries
The
and
whole financial industry. I mean,
And,
the whole financial industry, it's technology that is causing
right.
this massive change.
Education, most likely. Government
That's right.
is going to have a representative government is going to have a stiff challenge going forward. So these questions of innovation are temporal, but they're going to be with us, I think.
Yeah, to be honest, the one winner in all this are the universities. No, I'm very serious because
You're right there.
So please tell us.
it's the quest for research and talent is more important than ever.
Yeah.
And the companies don't have the wherewithal to do their own long-term research. It's just very difficult to do. Even in IBM, a huge amount of our research comes from hanging out with you all. I'm serious. That's why we all hang out with you. Say, why are you here or at MIT? Well, because that's where the smart people are. The Billy Sutton answer. And it's a really, I think the role of universities is becoming much higher because they are playing this central role in helping look at the future, and that's not bad.
I think there's a much higher recognition of the importance of that transition. We do a CEO survey every 2 years. So we're in the middle of one right now. And in the last one, we asked a couple questions around innovation. Things like, to a CEO, how well do you think your company, or how important do you think it is for your company to innovate, to think about changing its business model before the marketplace shifts from underneath you? And about 80% thereabout would say, yes, we need to do that. But then you ask them the next question, which is, how well do you think your company does that today? and the numbers were roughly in the 20% range, right? So there's a growing recognition that gap exists. And yesterday I happened to be doing another one of these. I was with Barry Meyer, who's the CEO of Warner Brothers. And so we're kind of on this subject. You know, what is Warner Brothers doing to reinvent itself before the marketplace, you know, reinvents it? And he used TMZ as an example. TMZ is a Warner Brothers property. And TMZ basically got started because of the Mel Gibson story that happened down in Malibu in many ways. And he was really proud of the fact that that brand had been nurtured along from, you know, kind of just a wild root offshoot to now being quoted in major media as a source for real stories. Maybe back to some of the points you were making.
Yeah.
Right? Because TMZ now routinely breaks major stories around town. But then he took it a step further and said, well, that was great. So we built this incredible social audience on our website and blogging and user-generated content and, you know, the whole new media model. But we couldn't make money stopping there. So we had to take that brand now, once we nurtured it a little, and bring it to traditional media. And it's now a syndicated television program, and it makes really good money by being syndicated out over station. You know, in LA it's on Fox, I believe. But so here you see kind of an idea that starts in the new paradigm, and it kind of helps change the entire structure and the way of thinking about launching a new brand within a traditional media company, but it actually gets kind of its support structure by finding a way to get it married back to traditional media, traditional broadcast. So I thought it was a kind of an interesting story of how they're thinking about changing their brand. Yeah.
So I would love to go on. Why don't you ask the last question and then we'll start?
Yeah.
Yes.
I wanted to do two things. First, I wanted to answer Irving's question from earlier about whether or not organizations are banning or how they're using social media. The last study that I saw came out just last month in October. It's a survey of like 14 or 1,500 CIOs. 54% ban
Really?
Twitter and Facebook. Only 10% of for-profit corporations allow complete use of social media inside, because there are a lot of previous studies that say it decreases productivity in lots of organizations. And there are a lot of companies that talk about Facebook as just electronic scrapbooking, and so there's a sense of it as a time waster.
No, I understand.
And then, of course, there was a lot of publicity around the Marines banning.
Yes.
And so I wanted to mention that. And then to Ernie's question about the industries and the companies, I mean, the company right now that everybody talks about in terms of reinventing, sort of its order and its priorities is Apple. Who would have thought that you would take music and iPhones and use that to drive computer sales?
No, that's
So
very
that is
good.
the,
And Apple, we have to remember, was almost dead
It had a near death.
That's right.
at one point. Yeah, but Patty, it's very interesting to the point about keep control of your employees and therefore don't let them do that. In IBM, about 50% of the people who work at IBM are mobile. Is that about right, Steve? I'm sorry?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Wow.
That means they're all over the place and they're working God knows where. So all of a sudden, if somebody comes and says, okay, Melissa, you're the anthropologist, how the hell do we control these people who are working from home? And God, this woman is breastfeeding instead of working.
She's probably doing both at the same time, which is probably worse. But
No, but I'm serious. You have to realize the cat is out of the bag.
That's right.
And if you try to keep it, all these other things fall out.
right. And so it means that as you're doing the reinvention, you have to reinvent what constitutes the metrics for the work,
Exactly.
how it is that you think about management needs.
Yeah, exactly.
And so all of those things change. The only little comment I wanted to make about the relationship with universities, because we live in a privileged switch position in Annenberg, we get invited to go lots of places and do lots of talks. And it was only, I don't know, maybe 7, 8 years ago where I had this lovely audience of all of the executives from the Tribune Corporation. One of their big executive things. We had the LA Times people, we had all the other papers, we had West Publishing, all of this good stuff. And they were talking during the Q&A about the fact that their market was being eaten up by places like Monster.com and all of this. And, you know, they said, well, you do consulting, what would you suggest? And I said, buy it. And they all laughed like I was joking. And I said, this is not a joke. This is free consulting.
Yeah.
Right.
And it is really, really hard
Yeah,
when you're dealing with organizations who don't understand what the future looks like.
No, I
So
understand.
it's
and
a huge issue.
as I said, Patty has the last word, and with that, thank you very
Thank you.
much.